everyone, and welcome back to Homescreen. As always, I am your host, Alex Yeager. As the title says, I am apparently a phenomenal bean chef, but that is entirely irrelevant to the episode. Just wanted to put that out there. So, without further ado, let's hop into some upcoming releases. We start off our release schedule this week with Submerged: Hidden Depths. This upcoming adventure game from Uppercut Studios is the standalone sequel to 2015's Submerged. Return to this flooded world and explore the vast ruins lost beneath the water's surface. Scour the vast blue waves as you search for the seeds of the world's salvation. Taking the form of a third-person adventure, this game features absolutely stunning graphics as well as a soundtrack from BAFTA Award winner Jeff Van Dyke. Discover all this drowned world has to offer when Submerged: Hidden Depths releases March 10th for PlayStation, Xbox, and PC. Also releasing March 10th, we have Young Souls from 1P2P Studios. Take on the role of two twin orphans as you battle your way through this 2D side-scrolling brawler, reminiscent of arcade beat-em-ups of the past. When their foster father mysteriously vanishes, it's their job to travel through the strange portal in the cellar and find him. You can either play it solo, or grab a friend and combat this world together. With over 20 unique bosses and hundreds of customization options, this game certainly has quite a lot to offer. Will the twins be able to find their father? And just what happened to him anyways? Find out when Young Souls releases March 10th across all major platforms. And up next, we have Persona 4 Arena Ultimax. This fighter spin-off of the Persona franchise initially released back in 2014 for the PlayStation 3 and the Xbox 360. And it's now being brought back into the limelight. Your favorite characters from both Persona 3 and 4 are back and ready for an all-out brawl. You can either go through the story mode battling through characters one by one, or you can grab a friend and hop right into the action. With each character having specially crafted movesets with over-the-top aesthetics, they all feel quite unique. Do you have what it takes to reign supreme in the ring? Find out when Persona 4 Arena Ultimax releases March 17th for PlayStation 4, Switch, and PC. And finally, we have Stranger of Paradise: Final Fantasy Origins. Dive back into the colorful world of Final Fantasy once again with this new spin-off of the franchise. Now, while this game isn't a prequel or a remake of the original Final Fantasy, it does claim to be an alternate retelling of the story. Play through this vivid story either on your own, or you can have up to 3 others join your quest via online multiplayer. With 6 different classes or jobs that you can switch between during combat, you have an extremely wide array of ways to approach the game's active combat system. With stunning graphics and phenomenal music, this game is looking to be a real treat. Explore all this game has to offer when when Stranger of Paradise: Final Fantasy Origins releases March 18th for PlayStation, Xbox, and PC. Alrighty then, that is enough of the releases for now, so let's get into the real topic of today's episode. Among video game systems, there's one group that has always felt a little disconnected from the rest. And until a few years ago, it seemed like something that would only be available in sci-fi. That's right, talking about virtual reality. With headsets now more available and affordable than ever, I thought I would take some time to explain a bit more as to what VR has to offer. Take a look. Hi there, it's me again. How you doing? Good? No. Stop lying. Everything is bad, and reality sucks. Be honest with yourself. You need an escape. Hell, that's why escapism is one of the most common coping methods. What better way to escape than to reject existence and live in denial of how bad things are? And what better way to do that than with virtual reality? VR allows for all different kinds of experiences, from basic rhythm games to physics-based puzzles, pretty much anything you could hope for. There's probably something either on the market or currently being made that'll satisfy that urge. It allows for a whole new level of interactivity with the medium since the controller is your actual body and the screen is right in front of your face. But it's not without its flaws. Anyways, I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. So virtual reality, what is it? You may have seen the ads for it, those weird things on Facebook where the people are flapping their arms about, and that's not entirely wrong. Essentially, you put on the headset and look through 2 lenses showing a skewed vision of what you're actually supposed to be seeing. That itself actually modulates how your eyes would normally perceive it, and that's why it looks like a full picture around you. Now, obviously, VR still sounds like a weird sci-fi thing, you know, a fake reality that you are enveloped in entirely. And a couple years ago, it was honestly really unrealistic to even think about getting. But now that prices have dropped from a couple $1,000s to one of the mainline headsets on the market running for $300, which is less than even the new PlayStation system, it's something that honestly anyone could really buy. So what's the draw of it then? Well, as I was talking about before, VR allows for a whole new level of interactivity with the content you're actually doing. One of the most common ones that you've probably seen a little bit of is Beat Saber. You're standing in a void, slashing at blocks coming at you to the beat of a song. They can get a lot harder. Trust me. This was painful. But that's still one of the most basic experiences you can do. You also have things like Superhot, another one that is considered an absolute must-have for anyone with a headset. Time only moves when you yourself move. Yeah, there's a game on the computer for it, but that one is only when you look around with a mouse. This one, if you aren't standing perfectly still, everything is still slowly going around you. It is quite literally your physical movements that dictate what is happening in the world. Or you can have experiences like this one. It's not your rhythm game, it's not Superhot, it's something entirely different. Instead of time moving when you do or just slashing to the rhythm, you have to anticipate your own movements. Yeah. The way this one works is you're essentially stuck in a time loop and create multiple copies of yourself to finish the level by either getting rid of all the targets or all the enemies. Now that may sound very basic, but when you can only create one copy at each set location, you have to then anticipate where you're going to be picking up an item the next time around. Yeah, try doing that on a computer. You can still do it, obviously, but there's something different about knowing, okay, I have to keep in mind this line on the barrel is where I have to set the gun so that next time I'll be able to reach to that line and that's where the gun will be when I need to pick it up in the future. And that is some of the most basic things you have to do in that. I have spent multiple hours just stuck on one or two levels trying to figure out everything I need to do in what order to get everything done. And this is just a fraction of the type of things available. You also have things like Five Nights at Freddy's or Resident Evil 4 entirely within VR, where all the scare is right up in your face. That wasn't a proper sentence, but I'm going with it. It's absolutely terrifying, purely because of the fact that when you're sitting down at a computer playing these games or playing them on a console, there's this disconnect. You're not immediately in it, you're watching a screen, you're watching someone do it. But when you're in VR, there isn't that much disconnect. You can't even see outside of the headset unless you're like tilting it up and looking directly downwards. There's little to no way to really tell exactly where you're standing in your space. It's something so easy to get lost in, but that's what makes it amazing. So even if you aren't really into the scary games or anything like that on the store, there's more than enough for you to choose from. Like I was talking about before, you have rhythm games, Beat Saber and Pistol Whip. You have puzzle games like Shadow Point Conservatory and... I'm gonna be honest, this one has a working title, so I'm kind of just gonna not talk about the title itself, but I highly suggest checking it out. It's in beta, you can find it on the App Lab. And something else I should mention. There's the Oculus App Lab, so if you're doing things with Oculus, you can start finding games that are still in beta, and you can help test them and create a better community and better software for the system. I know it sounds like a lot, but it's honestly a lot easier than it seems. Now, I did mention at the beginning that VR isn't without its flaws. And one of the main flaws is you can get really motion sick depending on the games you're playing. Yeah, I know, motion sickness from playing a video game. So phenomenal. But people are working on ways to circumvent it. The main way motion sickness happens is in situations like this. That was a smash cut. I don't know if that worked. When your eyes are perceiving movement that your body itself isn't perceiving, you start getting really dizzy and sick. This mainly happens when active locomotion in games is being used. You're not teleporting to certain points and you're not just popping about, you're actually walking around and moving within the space, normally by using the joysticks. But companies have been finding ways to circumvent this, such as teleportation movement, like you can see in Shadow Point Conservatory, or just having yourself be stationary and everything comes to you, like in Beat Saber. Obviously, it's not perfect, and it does remove some of the immersion from the experiences, but it allows everyone to actually experience what virtual reality can do. Now, if you still do want to use your active locomotion, you can, and in all honesty, you may not get that motion sick. It varies from person to person. There's really little known about exactly what causes it. But you can always end up working through it. When I first got my headset, I couldn't even stand a second using active locomotion. I immediately had to reject it and rip off the headset. But over time, by a good old exposure therapy, I've gotten used to it. I can now go for a little while before I have to lose my lunch. Obviously, I would still prefer not having the feeling in general, but it allows me to experience games like Boneworks or the Resident Evil 4 remake. Things I couldn't even have dreamed of doing when I first got the headset. But over time, the software and hardware are both becoming better, more available and more active for everyone. Now, is this going to completely overtake all of your mainstream games and consoles? No, there's no way. But still something I think you should keep an eye on. Anyways, it's really hard to explain what VR is and kind of what the experience of it is when I'm just standing here talking. In all honesty, something you kind of got to experience for yourself. But I may have a way to give you a little bit more insight. And welcome back. I hope you enjoyed that package. And as I was saying, here's my guest here to discuss a little bit more about what VR can currently do and what it might be able to do in the future. So if you just want to introduce yourself, say hi to the people.
What's up, gamers? My name's Joel. I don't know if any of you guys recognize me, but I used to also talk about video games on a show called Homescreen.
A much inferior one, might I
Oh,
add.
absolutely,
Just,
way
you gotta
way
put it
inferior.
out there.
No. I am willing to admit that. But that being said, it's great to be back. It's been a while.
Yeah, it most certainly has. So, anyways, VR.
VR.
What are your thoughts on it, just in general?
Okay, so I know like we're kind of here to talk about VR, like the ins and outs of how like the possibilities, but also like the possible drawbacks of it. And your video that you just made really did a good job of talking about that. Like one of the big things that you mentioned was the motion sickness and some of the like downsides that you can have just from playing VR in the first place. And for me, I kind of understand that. I think that there are like having ways that you can work past it is fine. I'm not worried about that at all. The thing that concerns me the most about VR, though, is the way that people can get sucked in.
Want to elaborate a little bit more on what you mean by that?
Yes, absolutely. I love talking about this because one of the biggest inspirations for me for this opinion is this is a really nerdy thing for me to say, but it's all based on the book Ready Player One. Ready Player One, for those of you who don't know, it's basically just a dystopian book about like a distant, not so distant future where everybody is just connected to VR, and that is life. Like life outside of the game is like it's not real life, basically. And I feel as though just in general, promoting VR to the extent that, or like if we continue to promote VR and it does become as good as it could become or as it had become in the book, then that's something to be a little bit concerned about.
No, I definitely see where you're coming from. From my perspective, at least, I highly doubt we will get anywhere near that, at least in our lifetimes. But it's also hard to say because just seeing how far VR has come from, hell, back when we were just kids, it was practically non-existent. I mean, you had the Virtual Boy, but that was
Yeah,
about
right.
it.
Exactly. And I mean, that's the thing too. I mean, you can, even if we're not even talking about VR, we can go back just 20 years. And 20 years ago, all we had were flip phones and Nokias. And now here we are, like, I have this cheapo, like, it's not cheapo phone, but like, this thing is huge. It's, the entire front screen is just, it's just such a crazy change that we've had. And I feel like if technology is going to continue to progress at a constant rate, then we will get to that point eventually. Something that I've kind of wondered about though is what if VR, what if that's going to be like the next big thing? Like, when we were growing up, the big thing was phones, and all of our parents or whatever were like, I don't get this, I don't like this, and then we were like, no, this is ours, this is our thing. What if VR is going to be the same way for the next generation?
So, in all honesty, I can see where you're coming from with that. And it's something that's been joked about and toyed about in the space of, VR is going to replace home consoles and all of this. And I think I can firmly say the likelihood of that happening is extremely slim. Not
Okay.
only just because the issues you have with like motion sickness and everything like that, but there are some experiences that just wouldn't be as effective in VR purely because of the art of a narrative. For instance, have you ever heard of a game called What Remains of Edith Finch?
I have heard the name, however, I have not played it.
So that is a game that is almost entirely story-based. So you're going through, and as you're discovering each member of this family, it's done in an entirely different art style. Some taking the space of like comic books, and you're going through panels such as this, or some being more just like a child's fantasy and things are floating about. So especially in instances like that, or even if you start looking at games like Hades or Dead Souls, anything like that, or Dead Cells. Dead Souls is a Russian classical novel. But Dead Cells, games like those don't transfer into VR.
Okay.
So I feel like if VR is to become the next big thing, you're then essentially just knocking out hundreds of possible genres. So, while it won't overtake it completely, I would not be shocked, though, if it started becoming a bit more common to see in the market. So, getting up there in your names with your PlayStations and Xboxes, having headsets as well as your regular consoles.
Yeah, and that's another thing I've kind of wondered about too, because like they've already kind of started along this road, but like if I think another thing that they'll probably start long before anything else would happen is they'd try to integrate VR into some systems like that. Like you've already seen, obviously there are tons of games that are already in VR, but like, do you think that you see a potential like in the future of there being a game that would offer both a VR mode and just a flat screen
Well,
mode?
there are actually some games that already do that. For instance, Resident Evil 7 Biohazard, if you own it on the PlayStation and you also own PlayStation VR, you can play it both as the regular game, but if you hook your VR headset up to it, you can play the entire game in VR.
Oh, okay.
And while they're certainly not as common, you also have some ones like Subnautica, a lot of horror games. So like Subnautica, Layers of Fear, the Resident Evil 7. Those are games that usually offer both versions of an experience if you have it on the right system or in the right format.
Okay. Now, if I'm understanding this correctly, first off, the Resident Evil series, that's a third-person shooter kind of game, right? More or less?
It's complicated.
Okay.
It varies based on the game. Resident Evil 7 and 8 took more of a first-person perspective
Okay.
and leaned much more into the survival horror than the full-on shooter.
Okay.
Now, 7 does have the VR. I don't believe 8 has a VR version to it, though. But it is one of those games where, again, you have to have it only on PlayStation VR. That's the only official VR version of it there is. Granted, there are mods, just like there are with any other game, because it's the same way of how you can get Alien Isolation to work in VR.
Right.
So there are mods you can do to turn other games into VR, but as it stands, the PSVR is the only RE7 one that you can do in that way.
Gotcha. Okay. So, I mean, I guess, I'm beginning to realize that a lot of the thoughts I've had towards VR in this whole little talk here has been pretty negative and a little bit like scared, like I'm scared of VR.
Mm-hmm.
And like I'm curious, what do you think to be like some of the best characteristics of what VR has to offer today?
So as it stands, the immersion you can get with VR while also maintaining that sense of disconnect. So for instance, with Five Nights at Freddy's Help Wanted, it is an extremely stupid horror game. But kind of like how when you're playing on a console, you can just zone out and get caught off guard, you still have that space where you know what's going on around you. But especially for horror, VR takes away that space. You can still see out of the headset if you look down, like directly at your feet. You can see through the bottom of the headset. But it creates such an immersive atmosphere, especially if you put, a good set of headphones on with it. So for immersion, both in horror and not, it is absolutely phenomenal. Plus, there is the aspect that you can start using your own body as the controller. So one thing we were talking about while we were playing the package is super hot. So on the computer how it works, it's really only when you look around with the mouse, everything starts moving.
Mm-hmm.
You have to be standing, quite literally, perfectly still.
In order for, yeah, that's true.
Yeah, you twitch your hand a little bit and everything moves as long as you're twitching your hand. So there is that extra level you add on top of it, where you can start creating more interesting games. One I had talked about in the package is called Shadow Point Conservatory. The entire way that game works is you have a bunch of light sources directed at certain panels that have a shape outlined on them. Then using the objects in the environment, which you can go over and pick up, you have to hold them at the correct distance, the correct position, the correct way from each of those light sources to fill out the outline on the panel, which is something that would be nigh impossible to properly achieve on a PlayStation or a PC or Xbox or any of that.
Yeah, that's very true.
Mm-hmm. So it's just a lot of different aspects to it that, well, eventually you could probably figure out a way to do it on console or PC. There's just that extra step right now that VR has above. And eventually they probably will figure it out, and it's going to end up coming down to two lines of there are certain things consoles can do that VR headsets can't. There are certain things you can do in VR that you just can't conceivably do on a console.
So do you think like the most realistic thing for the future of video games is going to be more along the lines of a comprehensive way for both systems to work together? Like I feel like from this talk at least, the implication that I'm receiving is that in the future when video games as video games evolve, it's not going to be just specifically VR because there are so many things that just having the flat screen to look at has to offer that VR can't. But then there's still all those different possibilities that you can get from VR that this screen can't give. Mm-hmm. So do you think, what do you think the relationship is going to be between the two in the future?
I definitely think in the future, once people kind of get their footing a bit more with what VR is and what it can do, you'll see a lot more games where they have both a VR version and a physical version to it, because obviously you're going to have people that prefer either. But I also think we're going to start getting more of the games that essentially are two sides of the same coin with it. We were, again, talking a little bit as we were setting it up. Things like Keep Talking and Nobody Explodes, the Gorilla Tag, or whatever that one is you had said.
Yeah.
Where you have one or two people in the headset taking on one role in a game, but then other people either playing on a console or on their phones, essentially going in on another end of it. Essentially, it's just creating a phenomenal party game because you have multiple ways you can then be interacting with the content. And it's something that is interesting and diverse enough that it has the power to stick around for a while.
Yeah, that's very true. I don't know. I mean, like, personally, I'm very excited to see what VR is going to have to offer in the future. But like, I'm also maybe I'm a little bit biased with my opinions because I've just for the longest time, one of my friends has had like a very nice VR headset. And I've had the opportunity to go in there and use it and kind of get used to how it works and everything like that. And it's great. I love it. I just feel like I feel like the novelty of it wears off after a while, and I can never really see myself like wanting to have something like that just always so that way I can keep playing it. Mm-hmm. I will say, in defense of VR, the only games I have played are Beat Saber and Pistol Whip, the two
rhythm games, essentially.
rhythm-based music games that are basically like Guitar Hero but a little bit cooler. Mm-hmm. So like if that's all you play on VR, I can assume that that would get old eventually for anybody. Mm-hmm. But I don't know. I haven't really had a chance to expand my experiences with VR. So like that's kind of the perspective I've had for a really long time. I think that that'll probably change as time goes on. I don't know. I mean, I know we should probably also talk about meta, though, because I think meta is something that's a whole different can of worms.
So, for those of you who are unaware, Meta, or what used to be the Facebook company, essentially the domain of Zuckerberg, they are the ones who actually create one of the most popular headsets on the market, that is the Oculus. Mm-hmm. Both the Rift, which is the tethered, and the Quest, which is the entirely wireless version, is all done in that format. And Meta is now their new weird initiative of creating the metaverse, which is just like a B+ rec room or VR chat.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing that's really put in this like fear from me with the whole VR thing. Like before I saw this whole meta thing coming together, I mean the metaverse is like the really obviously dystopian seeming like idea. So like I don't know if it's going to take off. I really hope it doesn't. I hope people don't have that much confidence in Mark Zuckerberg because that guy is terrifying. Yeah. But like the metaverse has really put a sour look at VR for me personally, and I am concerned that if metaverse is the way that VR continues to grow, then that could result in problems.
I, in all honesty, would be very shocked if the metaverse takes off in the way they want it to, especially because it has to compete with other things like Rec Room and all of that. But it's also, VR is something you don't have to interact with apps or aspects like that. Because you can just, like you said, do things like your Beat Saber or your Pistol Whip. But you can also start getting into things then like Myst or Shadow Point Conservatory or Superhot. Because you had played 2 rhythm games, which on their own is fine, especially if you start side-loading custom songs into Beat Saber. Mm-hmm. But that is just a minuscule fraction of what VR can do. I mean, hell, I play mini golf with my headset. Like, they have a bunch of weird custom courses that screw with the gravity and all of that. And I'll just, every once in a while, if I am just sad, I put on my headset and I start playing some mini golf because it's dumb and fun.
Yeah, and I mean, I suppose that's the most important thing about video games, whether it's VR or not. Like, as long as you're having fun with whatever it is that you're doing, like, more power to you. I hope that you enjoy it. Like, you know, for me personally, my go-tos are roguelikes, Super Smash Bros, and League of Legends because I'm a nerd. But like, you know, like you have these specific games that make you happy as a person, and I think that that's really cool about gaming and VR and all these things because there are so many different opportunities for people to find new things that they're going to be interested in and enjoy. And like you said, mini golf, that sounds like so much fun. I mean, I play golf with your friends, with my buddies online all the time. And like just having another outlet for that is in no way a bad thing.
I couldn't have put it better myself. But unfortunately, we are out of time here for this week's episode of Homescreen. So, from all of us here to those of you at home, good night and good games.